You may have just joined us for our last talk, which was really fantastic with Mark Dodgson and all of the relevant bits, company design process. But we are back and we've got another great talk for you. And this one is all about usability testing. So I'll take 1 minute to introduce Maya here, but just as a side note, we will be having a little bit of a Q&A at the end. If you have any questions, you can just type that into the comment section and we'll get to those at the end. So if you have anything throughout the chat, just put it in there and we'll get to it a little bit later. But yes, so Maya here is a product designer at Deloitte Digital, and she's really been working through different design roles across multiple sectors, I think public, healthcare and retail sectors. And she's really focused on designing these good experiences for Canadian citizens and putting that accessibility piece really in there. And she's been doing this at Deloitte Digital for a little while now. And we're so happy to have you, Maya. So thanks for joining us. And I'm so excited to watch your talk here.
Thanks so much, Rachel. It's lovely having someone introduce you. Yeah. I am so used to having to introduce myself, so it's really nice. So like Rachel mentioned, I'm from Deloitte Digital, which is our creative consultancy. That may come as a surprise to some people that Deloitte does more than just accounting, but yes, we actually have this whole design capability. And we have a team of folk that actually work on building end-to-end products and digital transformation experiences. So it includes folk like myself that are designers, but it also includes engineers and product consultants. Like Rachel said, I'm going to be talking about usability testing today. I thought this would be an applicable and interesting topic just because if you're learning about design in academia, or if you are doing independent case studies, sometimes you don't have the opportunity to involve yourself in usability testing. So I just wanted to share some tips and tricks that I've learned within my own project work that hopefully you can carry into your design internships or future project roles. Also, I see some people commenting that they love Notion. I'm so glad to hear that. It's my favorite technology. I'm not a brand ambassador, but I swear I like promote it to everyone. So I feel like I should reach out to them and ask them if they want me to be a brand ambassador for them. But anyways, I digress. So usability testing. Today we're going to be talking about what it is, what it's not, and why we do it. We'll jump into who and when to test, and then we'll conclude with how to conduct a usability test, and then have a Q&A section at the end if you have any questions about usability testing. So first and foremost, what is usability testing and why do we do it? I want to preface this with what usability testing is not for anyone who's a bit newer to design and hasn't heard these terms before. Sometimes usability testing is construed to be predictive analytics, and that folk may think usability testing will help them know what future user needs are or what how they can anticipate the feature roadmap will look in the future. Sometimes people think usability testing is about testing the user themselves. That is not true. It's about validating your designs, and you should never be messaging it as something where you're testing your user. It's testing your product design. And lastly, usability testing is sometimes focused on just your target persona, which often tends to be someone who's able-bodied, but usability testing in a good practice should be involving the accessibility inclusivity angle. We do, within the design process, want to know about our user needs, the user types that we're looking at, but that falls more so within generative research. So generative research occurs during the design discovery phase, which is at the beginning of a project. And you're really looking at who are our potential user needs and wants, what are the different user types that our product must consider, and how will our product fit into users' lives? We're never designing our product to exist in isolation. We need to accommodate the physical world that a user exists in. And all of these different considerations fall within generative research. So what's key about this is you're not necessarily testing a specific design or feature yet. You're a lot more open-ended and unconstrained in your thinking about just what is my potential user need or want. An example of this would be if we were working on a design problem on solving for how we can improve the mental health of students. Generative research would be at the beginning of our design problem. We would interview students to get an understanding of what is their mental health today, what potential activities do they do to address mental health, what is perhaps missing that they would like to see to better address mental health. So we're not asking them about specific features or solutions yet, we're just getting an understanding of what is their current state experience. That's what generative research is, and that's why it's different from usability testing. All right, whoops. So now that we've defined what usability testing is not, let's jump into what usability testing is. Put simply, usability testing is a test that asks users to complete a series of tasks with a prototype to understand whether product features are accessible, user-friendly, and address user needs. If we were doing a usability test on Instagram, for instance, we may prompt a user and say, walk me through how you would post a picture. The point of usability testing is to validate whether a user can accomplish their goals and tasks with the interface alone without needing to be instructed on how to do it. Is the platform design intuitive enough for them to understand? The other aspect about usability testing is it challenges our creativity. Very rarely will you come across a design project where you don't have some type of constraint that impacts your design. And when we're positively challenged to design within constraints, we often create a better experience for everyone. In this case, constraints might be having to design for different user types. This concept is known as universal design. So a good example of this would be if you think about sidewalks and the curved edge of a sidewalk, that was originally designed for users in wheelchairs or for users that have children in baby carriages. But it now benefits people that are using bikes or people that are using skateboards. So universal design is a concept where you're designing for one type of user to accommodate their specific needs, but because you've done so, it now benefits many other users. Lastly, usability testing helps mitigate the risk of negative adoption or poor brand perception because we've tried and tested the product, we've iterated on our designs so that when we hand it off to the development team and to our client, we can hand it off with the assurance that our designs are going to meet user needs, are going to solve the problems that they have, and that they are intuitive and user-friendly. There's a lower risk that we design, that the developer then builds it for 6 months, puts it into the real world, and someone comes back and says, this actually doesn't address my problem at all and is a really unintuitive experience for me. So this sums up the last 3 points I just brought up, but there's really 3 key benefits to why we do usability testing. The first is human-centered design. So as designers, we want to put our user first, and we want to embed them throughout the design process. We do that at the beginning with generative research during discovery, and we do that throughout through usability testing, where we're asking the user's input continuously on understanding, are we getting the designs right? Are we actually solving for the problem that we've identified with our solution? Secondly, like I said before with stakeholder management, we're de-risking the product for clients when we hand it off to the development team to build that final product. So we have that assurance that we have ensured and tested that the designs are meeting the needs that they need to. And lastly, from a project work perspective, it actually drives decision making. One of the key challenges you'll experience as a designer is that everyone is a user, so everyone has an opinion on design. Everyone has a perspective on what's most intuitive for them as a user. But the key difference is not every product is used by the same type of user. So for instance, I as a user may say, I really prefer seeing notifications as a toast banner at the top of my app. My team member may say, I really like when notifications appear as a modal window. But if we do a usability test and the user says, I don't want to see any notifications in the app experience, I only want to see it on a lock screen, we need to go with their user preferences. So what usability testing helps do is it helps illustrate, irrespective of what my or my team members' design preferences might be, we need to align to what our target users' preferences are, and it helps justify why we're designing things a certain way and why we're prioritizing certain feature designs. So we've defined what usability testing is and why we do it, and we're going to jump into who do we test and when do we test. So in terms of who facilitates a usability test, this is typically one to do either product designers or user researchers. Ideally, you want to have someone who has not designed the product facilitate the test. It just helps you be a bit more objective when you're hearing feedback from the user. But I have facilitated usability tests in the past where I was the designer. And what I would encourage you to do is just don't tell the user that you're the one who designed it. Users often feel bad if you're like, I worked on this for 2 months, telling you, oh, actually, this part of it wasn't as intuitive for me. So, kind of keeping yourself separate from the design and saying, I just want to hear your honest feedback helps you get more transparency about what was confusing so that we can fix it and really ensure we're building the best version of this product. In terms of our users, we typically want to involve 8 to 10 users within one usability test round. So unlike a survey where you would want, 100 users to justify, 100 people said yes to this question, with usability testing, you don't need 25 users to say the same thing to validate your design. Instead, what you want to focus on by the 10th user is, have I heard the same insights now? That gives me assurance that I have now involved enough diverse perspectives from my target user base to consider the different ways my target user may perceive this product. The third group of people that you may want to involve in usability testing are product and development teams. So while you do want to keep usability tests to 1 to 2 people on the design side, because you don't want to overwhelm the user with a crowd of your team members watching them, it never hurts to bring in one product or one development person occasionally within a usability test so that they can hear and see what the user is thinking. It's one thing to hear someone tell you, oh, the user thinks this way, or the user finds this experience unintuitive, and it's another to actually see your target user go through the design and watch them either struggle or succeed. It helps to make your internal team members a lot more empathetic to your target user, and it helps them to begin to think from the perspective of your target user rather than from their perspective of what they as a user may prefer. The same concept goes with clients. Clients, this is more from a consulting perspective, but clients are typically more busy, so you can't always involve them in helping observe a facilitated session, but you can record your interviews afterwards and invite them to listen in later on. This also helps them become much more empathetic to your target user, and it helps them to begin to think from the perspective of that target user. So now that we know who to test and who to involve in facilitating that test, we can go into when is the right time to test. This just shows the general design process that you can follow, starting with discovery and ideation, going into low fidelity and high fidelity wireframing, with product build and product launch at the end. As designers, we're often involved from discovery and ideation all the way up until product build. Obviously, we're not building the product ourselves unless we also have development skills, but we do help developers with, when they're building the design, answer any questions or ambiguity they have about the interaction of those designs. But where in this are we supposed to conduct usability tests? So there's actually 3 areas where you can conduct a usability test. The first is within low fidelity wireframing. Low fidelity wireframes are essentially your rough sketch wireframes. You're not including the logo, the brand colors. You're not making it pixel perfect just yet. You're just really focusing on, where am I organizing my information? How is the navigation? And those are the 2 aspects you want to test with your user. Is it intuitive that I put settings within a submenu under the account profile icon? These are the kinds of things that you can test at the low fidelity stage. High fidelity, you are now bringing in your logo, your brand colors, you're making it look hyper realistic and With tools like Figma, you can even mimic a product so that it looks like it's been built because it's interactive and users can click through and see different screens. In high fidelity wireframing, you're seeing if this product were to be built today and saving ourselves, 6 months of development effort, would it be well received by users? If not, what could we change to be more intuitive about the experience? The benefit of conducting usability tests at both the low fidelity and the high fidelity stage is that we get to learn more about our users each time. So in low fidelity, we're doing our first interaction with our users to understand, is this feature design usable? From what we learn, we can iterate on our designs, but we can also take their mindset and their thought pattern and apply it to future designs. So if we are designing a login account during the low fidelity stage, and we discover that users intuitively expect it to auto suggest, then maybe in our high fidelity stage, when we're also beginning to design ordering an item, we include that autofill feature within the input fields, right? So with each usability test, you understand your users better, and you're better able to anticipate the way they may think, so that in the next test, hopefully you're getting the experience a bit more accurate and a bit more intuitive for your users. The last stage where you can conduct usability testing is in the post-product launch. So here, it's about identifying feature improvements to better improve and grow the product. Obviously, you're conducting usability testing throughout the design process, but your user base could change. The more time and exposure you have to your users using the product, the more insights you can receive. So as designers, we're always looking for that opportunity to enhance, to improve, and to grow our features and our products. All right, so we've just gone over what is it, why do we do it, when and who do we do it with, and now we'll jump into how to actually conduct a usability test itself. So in terms of planning and preparation, there are three key elements that you want to look at. Firstly, you want to look at your usability test goals. Secondly, you want to look at your testing documents. And thirdly, you want to consider recruitment. So for usability test goals, this is really about what do you want to learn? What features will you be focusing on? If you are designing an end-to-end product, it's not feasible typically to be able to test every single feature. So you may prioritize testing the appointment booking feature that you've designed over testing the create an account page if you're following the same type of input fields that a user would be familiar with when they're creating an account with Gmail or with Instagram, for instance. Your testing hypotheses are really helpful to both structure your usability testing script, which I'll get into in a second, but they're also helpful to structure how you socialize your findings with your internal team and with your client. A testing hypothesis, for instance, could be, we believe it'll be intuitive for users in our appointment booking functionality to switch from individual appointment booking to family appointment booking within step one. If this hypothesis is disproven and it's not intuitive for users, you now have a bit more structure when you're presenting your findings to your client to say, here was hypothesis one, it was disproven, it was not intuitive, therefore we're recommending changing the design by doing X, Y, Z. It just helps further justify why you need to change your design and iterate on your designs. Now, in terms of testing documents, there's 3 testing documents that I would recommend you create. The first is the testing plan. This outlines the users that you're going to be testing, the features that you will be testing, the testing method, compensation, dates, and the number of testing rounds. So from the perspective of someone doing an individual case study or doing design in academia, a testing plan is really helpful for you to just plan out, when am I going to be involving user input and when will I be iterating on my designs before going on to the next feature and the next design. From a consulting perspective, and for those of you that are doing an internship in design, this is also vital to getting the resources you need to be able to conduct your usability test, and make sure that other team members that may be interdependent on you are aware of your project timelines so that everything is working in alignment. It's really hard to integrate usability tests with during the project itself if you haven't set up the expectation that you're going to need, a couple weeks to iterate on your designs based on user feedback. So it's much better to do it at the upfront and set that expectation so the rest of your team members can align and plan for how they need to shift a couple of deadlines around to make sure that you have time to get your user feedback. The next piece is the interview script. So this helps you prepare questions that you will ask and the tasks that you will ask your user to complete. I like to stress test my interview script with another designer just to make sure that my tasks don't take longer than 45 minutes to 1 hour for them to complete. It's typically not a good idea to have a test that lasts more than an hour just because it's more cognitively overloading for users to have to complete that. So the general industry practice and recommendation is have your usability test exist within 45 minutes to 1 hour. And the third piece of documentation that you don't want to forget is your consent form. You want to get consent from your user that you can record the interview afterwards. This is very helpful because as you're facilitating a test, you're focusing more so on their task, but you can watch it afterwards, the recording itself, to pick up on any specific nuances in the user behavior. Sometimes users say one thing, but they mean another. We as humans naturally contradict ourselves, so it's helpful to rewatch an interview to say, okay, the user said that that appointment booking piece was really intuitive for them, but as I'm rewatching it, they struggled a little bit to find the right button to click to get to the next step. Consent forms are also helpful to just give the user a polite FYI that I want to be recording this interview. So if you're hoping to have them go on camera, giving them notice of that is just a nice thing to do so that they're aware of it and can prepare for that day. Lastly, in terms of recruitment, there's a couple platforms that you can use. Usertesting.com is really helpful for getting users within a specific area. So if you wanted users who live in Australia between the ages of 20 to 40, using usertesting.com can help you do so. If you want to involve users who use different assistive technologies, Fable is a really good platform for accessibility testing. Now, if your user base is a bit more niche than that, let's say you're working on a design problem where you're designing for McMaster students, it might make more sense for you to post a request for users in a McMaster University channel as opposed to using a platform. So just adjust where you recruit your users depending on how niche the user that you need. When we're executing our usability tests, there's two types of usability tests that you can follow. The first is moderated. So in this type of test, I would be asking you questions during the interview itself. And the benefit of moderated usability testing is if I'm asking you on Instagram to post a picture and you start going into view shops, I can kind of ask you, can you walk me through your thought process here? Why did you click this? I can stray from the script in order to understand these nuances in behavior. In comparison, unmoderated usability tests are where you hand off the tasks to the user at the upfront. You're not facilitating it with them, you're just watching them afterwards. You're watching the recording of them completing those tasks. This is less time consuming, and it ensures that the user follows the exact same tasks in every single test. The disadvantage is that you can't probe why a user clicks a certain way that you weren't expecting, so you can't discover more of the nuances and the user thinking behind their actions. When you're both conducting and later synthesizing your usability test findings, there's two types of data that you can collect. Qualitative data, obviously looking at users' thoughts and feelings, emotions, and body language. We typically, as designers, prefer qualitative data for usability testing because the attributes we're looking for when we're conducting the usability test is, was there confusion here? Did we create excitement in the product? Are we building engagement? Which are all qualitative considerations. However, there are some quantitative metrics you can use as well. So time on task would be a good metric to use if you're building a product where the time a user spends on that task matters. For instance, call center agents are measured, their performance is measured based on how long it takes them to complete a task. So in that case, time on task is a very relevant metric to be measuring a user or a usability test by. You can also ask users for feature ranking and user experience scores. In that instance, rate this experience out of 10 or out of 5. I know some user researchers will sometimes ask for their user experience score, but then they'll ask the user to explain to them why they rated a certain experience or ranked a certain experience out of 5 out of 10, for instance. User experience scores can sometimes be a bit arbitrary in the sense that my 7 out of 10 experience might be your 5 out of 10 experience, but asking a user to have to quantify their experience helps them kind of anchor in on whether they found that experience satisfying and then have to explain their rationale behind it, which gives you more qualitative data. For instance, if the user says, oh, that was a really easy experience, had no trouble completing those tasks, and then you ask them to rate the experience and they say it's a 3 out of 10, you probably want to probe a little bit deeper and understand, you said it was easy, but you're rating this 3 out of 10. So what are the reasons behind that? Even if it was intuitive, maybe there's something in the content that wasn't satisfactory or engaging for them. The last thing in terms of execution, a couple moderator tips and tricks that I've picked up that I thought I would share. First, emphasize that you're testing the prototype and not them. Nobody likes feeling like their competence is being tested. So if you emphasize that it's about, did we design the product well enough to be intuitive, not about your intelligence to use the product, users are a bit more forthcoming if they're confused by something or if something is unclear. Secondly, ask open-ended questions. Try not to be instructional when you're giving a task. So don't say, please show me how you would post a picture on Instagram by clicking the plus button in the top right corner. Instead, say, please walk me through how you would post a picture on Instagram. You want to see if they can take a goal and be able to complete that goal in the usability test. You don't want to see if they can hear what you said and just follow instructions to a T. Thirdly, ask why. Users often do things without explaining why. We ask them at the beginning of a usability test to think out loud about their experience. However, it's not intuitive to think out loud. I don't typically open my phone and say, okay, I'm just going to open my Google News app and start reading through the articles. So while you're having a user think out loud during a usability test, don't be afraid to probe a little bit and say, oh, I just noticed you clicked over there. Can you walk me through your thought process with that? And lastly, remember that there are people too. It's easy to get stressed about a usability test because you want to get the right findings, but creating a calm, casual, and fun environment just makes it a more enjoyable experience. And users are often going to be more comfortable and more willing to share how they actually found the experience. So the last piece of this is just sharing your findings. This is often a key component of usability testing, especially in a client environment. At this point in your usability test, you typically have a plethora of notes and you're wondering, how am I possibly going to sort through this? I like to use Miro, it's a platform, and you can post your wireframes on there and then take your notes, convert them into sticky notes, and pinpoint exactly where in the experience was there a pain point, where did they really enjoy something, so that I can see throughout the entire journey in my user interface design, where exactly were these different pain points. Once you've done that, you can begin to cluster your insights and theme them. You may walk away with 8 to 10 usability tests and have more than 50 insights. It's not feasible to present all 50 insights to your client. It's much better to theme those insights, which just makes it more absorbable for your client. So for instance, you may have a theme of privacy because you notice users were wary of putting their phone number in the create an account page or other areas. Thirdly, hypotheses. Like I said before, it's really helpful to have your hypotheses to structure your presentation when you're sharing your findings, because then you can go through those hypotheses that people were aware of when you said, I want to conduct a usability test to see if appointment booking is intuitive. You can take them back to that and say, okay, remember how we conducted this to see if appointment booking was intuitive. Here's why it wasn't, or here's why it was. And because of that, this is why I'd recommend we change this about our design. And lastly, recordings. So including interview recordings of key moments is really helpful to show the user experience. It resonates so much more with people when they can see a 30-second clip of someone actually navigating the product, as opposed to just hearing you say, at this point in the experience, the user really struggled to find the button to get to the next form. Hearing the user actually talk through it just makes them so much more real to your team members and to your client. All right, so that concludes my presentation on usability testing, and I hope you found it valuable, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the McMaster Designathon. I'm not sure if we have time for Q&A, Rachel, or if there were any questions.
Amazing. Yeah. So thank you so much, Maya. We don't have any questions in the chat, but we do have some time for questions. And I do have a couple of questions that we've kind of put together for you, if you don't mind a couple of minutes.
For sure.
That. So the first thing is that user research potentially has changed. Obviously, as lots of professions have had to deal with the impact that COVID had on everything. Have you noticed any kind of changes that you had to implement, and could talk a little bit about that?
I think the primary change was just that it moved from in-person to virtual.
Mm-hmm.
And I think from the user researchers that I've spoken to as well about facilitating those usability tests, the advantage is that your access to users is so much larger than that, because now you can access people in Australia, whereas before it was traditionally you would do it in person. The disadvantage is that it's sometimes harder to make it a comfortable and casual environment when you're separated by technology, right? It removes that level of organicness to the conversation. So it's kind of having to learn how to facilitate and making it just that much more casual and comfortable in spite of being separated by technology, which sometimes makes people feel a little bit more distant.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's like such an important skill I feel like I've found over the past, 2 years, is you can still develop that like sense of like closeness and trust in an online environment, but it's something you have to be a little bit more attentive of almost. And that kind of bridges into another question we have, is that on this wider scheme of things, user research as a field is kind of still developing. So I was wondering if you've noticed over the years kind of changes maybe in the outlook of the entire industry, or trends that are kind of emerging now, that you think that the upcoming user researcher should be aware of.
I think the first thing is just a shift towards human-centered design. So previously, a lot of it was, we're focusing on making sure if the technology works, it doesn't really matter, the user will accept it either way. Especially with everything moving digitally, there's a lot more pressure on companies to have to consider the user first. And you can see that in things that you might not intuitively expect to be human-centered design. So for instance, Apple's stance on privacy, that is them taking a human-centered look. This is a key need and want that users have, is more protection of privacy, and that's something they're using as part of their branding strategy. The other aspect too with user research is bringing in product inclusivity and accessibility. So this is something you can see with Google, for instance, when they were creating their Google Home, is just involving user input, not only of your target users and target personas, but also challenging yourself to say, we've traditionally cast the net of users to be like this circle of like able-bodied users. But if we expand it to be out here, we can capture so many more users. And the way you communicate that as value to your business is that it's a larger amount of revenue. There's obviously a human reason to do it as well, but often a propellant and a convincer for businesses to expand and actually involve themselves in user research is the bottom line. And so being more accessible, being more inclusive generates more revenue. And so that's another change that I think we've seen.
Yeah, amazing. I think it's going in the right direction there. But I'm sure there's probably, or maybe you can answer this, like how much do you come across people who are kind of skeptical about the value of user research, and how do you approach that?
I definitely think there's still like a bit of skepticism about user research, only because, like I was saying in my presentation, everyone considers themselves to be a user. So I think sometimes people think, why would I need to involve a user if like I can understand what's intuitive for me and I can just apply what I want to see in the platform? The way to address that in a consulting lens is to kind of kick off with the expectation of involving usability testing and user research, and wording it as a way to mitigate risk. So focusing on what in your target person that you're trying to convince is going to resonate with them. Often if you're speaking to someone within business as a client, risk is a big factor for them, right? They want the product to be successful. So if you're wording usability testing as an activity that mitigates risk and returns that as an ROI, it's a lot more attractive to them to pursue. And you can always start with saying, let's just do one usability test, show them the findings. And often a lot of people come around when they see that first round of findings and they begin to see how the user thinks. It's about making it less abstract and putting an actual user in front of them that they begin to understand, oh, I wouldn't have thought, a user would have navigated it that way. But now that I'm actually seeing someone talk through it and do it, I understand that like I, as a user, am separate from my target user base and I need to involve them more so.
Right. That's a good answer. Just show them the results and they'll come around basically. All right. Okay. So then I think we'll end it off with one more question, and that's kind of as a summary of all of this, because I know there's a lot of information for some of the newer designers. What do you think is like the number one best skill to be developing as a user researcher?
Ooh, that's a hard question. There's so much. I think first and foremost, and this is something you develop throughout your career, irrespective of how many years of experience you have in the field, is learning how to be empathetic. It's easy to say that in practice, but in theory, but in practice, being empathetic is like definitely a thought exercise. It's having to rethink and open yourself up to say, this is maybe not the way I would think about something, but I need to be empathetic and consider this user's perspective. It's easy to be empathetic when you agree with what someone is telling you, but I think as a user researcher, being empathetic also means if you completely disagree with someone's perspective on this, being empathetic is asking yourself, let me understand them better and why they're coming from it from this angle. Let me not just shut down that perspective because it doesn't resonate with me.
Wow. Yeah, that's hard for sure. Like it's definitely a long-term kind of skill. But there you go, guys. That's what you can be working on. So I think that will bring us to the end of our discussion today. But for anyone who kind of joined in a little bit later or wants to go back, we will be posting our recordings of all of the talks, but this one especially you'll be interested in if you're watching this and want to go back. That will be on our YouTube channel, hopefully by the end of the weekend, so you can go back very soon. But we'll let you know through the Discord or something like that when we've got that posted. So yeah, thank you so much, Maya. I learned a little bit, and I'm sure lots of people did too. So we really appreciate you having the time and coming out to this.
Of course. And thank you for running this, Rachel. I hope everyone else enjoys the rest of the speakers and the Designathon.
Absolutely. Okay. All right. We'll see you at the next one, guys.